Okay, so you've reached that interval in the ownership of your motorcycle where you need to do a tappet or valve clearance check, and you might need to change some of your shims. You might have the big ones, you might have the little ones, but what thickness do you need to change to, and how do you figure that out? I'm going to show you how I go about it. Welcome to Urban Monk TV. So welcome to Urban Monk TV, everyone. For you viewers that are my regular subscribers and are following the GS550 Cafe Racer build, I will be getting those carburetors off to do yet another cleaning because clearly we've got a fueling issue on one of the cylinders there. I'm waiting for a new ultrasonic cleaner to be delivered that I've ordered. So we'll get back to that. This video is for, I think, a larger audience, and anyone with a motorcycle that has valve shims that need to be checked and sometimes changed in order to maintain the right clearance in your valve train. I did a video on this a while back on both my V-Strom and my GS. On my V-Strom, I only needed one shim changed, and since then I keep checking and I don't need any changes. So I'm not experiencing a lot of wear there. And so my particular example wasn't that good in my video because we didn't do a lot of changes. But I had a new friend on Instagram contact me and ask for some help in calculating which changes he needed to make to his V-Strom. He has a 2005, so same motor as my 2012, same spec. And his name is Stefan Carlson. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Forgive me, I'm an American. We mispronounce everything for some reason. And but thank you for the opportunity to work through your situation and your particular numbers, and I'm going to use Stefan's numbers to do an example here for you. So let's get to his numbers and how I lay that out to make some logical sense of it. So just a note here, in the V-Strom we have these smaller type shims. In my older GS550 it has a larger shim. Really the difference here is that these sit on top of the bucket and the cam lobe directly impacts this. In newer engines, typically the bucket will have this shim underneath it, and so that's what the case is for the V-Strom. But no matter which kind you have, what really matters here, of course, is how thick they are, because they're being pushed this way, and as you try to maintain the clearance between the cam and the valve train, I'll call it, because there's more parts here than just these shims, you know, you need to adjust the thickness of this to maintain the gap. And the number one rule to remember with these is whatever you take away from your shim, you are adding that exact same amount to your clearance or to your gap. So if I take 5/100ths of a millimeter from the thickness of this shim, I'm adding 5/100ths to the gap. So the first thing I do is go to my service manual and get my spec. I need to know what I'm aiming for here. On the V-Strom, the intake spec is between 1/10 of a millimeter and 2/10 of a millimeter. So that's what I'm aiming for. This is the spec. On the exhaust, it is 2/10 to 3/10. So get that first. You need to know where you're aiming for. This essentially is the lowest, the thinnest that gap can be, and this is the thickest or most open that the gap can be. Then I just want to lay out my engine configuration. This is where it'll be different between different types of engines. For a V-Strom, it's a V-twin. You have a front cylinder and a rear cylinder, and they're a 4-valve system with 2 cams on each side, front and rear. And so, I'm going to start with front, and there is a left intake and exhaust valve and a right intake and exhaust valve. So I want left and right. Then I want to know, what do I currently have in each of these? So with this being the front of the motorcycle, I first have exhaust. Okay, so I first want to know what is the measurement that I'm getting of the gap, and I also want to know what is currently the thickness of the shim that's in that position. So I lay that down. I've got exhaust current and measured, and then I'm going to leave a couple spaces here for the change that I'm going to make and the result of what then we'll end up with when we're done with the job. So that's for the front. Then I have the rear, left and right, and we're going to have current, measurement, change, result. Now, if you have a 4-cylinder inline engine, then you would lay this out, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you had 2 valves per cylinder, then you would just have intake exhaust, or reverse that because of the front of the bike's this way. Exhaust intake, exhaust intake, exhaust intake, that kind of a thing. So it just depends on the configuration of your engine. Adjust this accordingly, but here we have a front and a rear. So, sorry I screwed this up. We're not ready for rear. We are ready for intake. Then I will go to rear and repeat all of this. Now the intake is first because it's toward the inside of the V on the engine, and we will have current, measurement, you get the drift, change, result, and then exhaust. Current, measurement, change. I'm just going to use delta for change, and result. Okay, so let's plug in the numbers that I got from Stefan from his V-Strom. Sorry, I switched camera microphones there, so that's going to sound funny. The first thing he told me is that because this is the first time he's doing this on his bike, all of his intake shims are the same size and all of his exhaust shims are the same size. So that's helpful. Currently in his exhaust he has 0.290. So these are 290 thousandths or 29 hundredths of a millimeter. So exhaust currently is a 0.290, 0.290, and exhaust down here 0.290, 0.290. If you had different sizes in there, just put what you've got. On his intakes, he has 0.275s. Okay, so that's what's in there. His measurements on his front exhaust, he had 0.23, and on the right he had 0.25. On the front intake he had 0.09 and 0.10. Continuing this for rear intake, currently measures 0.10 and 0.07. All of these are in millimeters. You can do this in inches or fractions of an inch or decimals of an inch. I really don't recommend it. Stick to the metric. And exhaust, he's measuring 0.22, sorry about my handwriting, 0.18. Okay, so first thing we do, let's identify what's out of spec. On intake, we want to be 0.1 to 0.2 millimeters. Who is not on intake at 0.1? This one is not, so we're going to change that. Let me get a different colored pen. This one is out of spec, and intake rear, where's my, this guy is out of spec. Now, those are the ones that are definitely out of spec, but if you're at the absolute bottom of the spec, it's reasonable to assume that you're not going to make it the next interval. On the V-Strom, it happens to be 24,000 kilometers or 15,000 miles or 24 months that you need to check the valve clearance. I don't know about that 24-month thing. If you're changing oil regularly and running the bike pretty regularly, I wouldn't agree with that. But that's, don't take my advice on that. Somebody will have a problem. That's what they recommend from this particular bike. So go to your service manual, look at your interval change. But if you're at the absolute bottom, like he is right here, well, then you're going to be out of spec more than likely by the next interval. So while we're in here, let's go ahead and change these and get them more squarely in the center of the range. And now for the exhaust, we have only one that is out of spec, and that is this guy. His exhausts are holding up pretty well for the most part. So, essentially, we are one shim size short here, but let's talk about shim size. Again, different camera, different microphone, I apologize, but the shims come in intervals of 0.05. So depending upon how much of a change you want to do, you could go just one shim size or possibly two, if there's room within the range to make that much of a change. And again, what you're subtracting from the shim, you're adding to the gap. So, back to our page. Oops, I wrote these down wrong. This is all supposed to be shifted down one. Sorry about that. So, here I have a 275 currently in this position. I'm at 0.09 and I want to get somewhere between 0.1 and 0.2. So if I went up one shim size, that would be adding 0.05. 0.05 would get me to 0.14. let's do that. So if I went down 0.005, I would be changing that shim to a 0.270, and the result would be 0.14. Excuse my mistake there. But if I went 2 shim sizes, well, then this would be 0.19, and this would be a 6.5. This is still within spec, so why not shoot for that? So that's the shim size we want, is a 0.265. For this one, you know, if I go a full shim size, I'll be right at the upper limit, which is fine, or I can split the difference and go right in the middle. That's probably what I would do. This is a personal preference thing. Some people like to have that gap really wide, but you're getting a little less lift then every time the lobe goes around, if that makes sense. So if we change that from a 275 to a 270, we will then get 0.15 as the result, which again is squarely in spec. On this one, we want to do pretty much the exact same thing we did here. These are both intakes. So we'll go to a 0.270 and result at 0.15. This one, we have room to go 2 shim sizes, so again we'd go to a 0.265, and that would get us to 0.17. Hoping this is all making sense for everyone. Let's look at our exhaust. Wait, sorry, here we've got an exhaust here. And this one, if I went a full 2 shim sizes, I would be, let's do that. If I go a full, I'm at 290. What if I went to a 280? That would get me to 2.8, which is within spec. I think that's a good move. Sorry, that's an 8. This guy, okay. So now we've addressed all of the ones that are definitely out of spec and need to be changed. Can we do more here? If I leave this at only 2/100ths from the bottom of the spec range, can I expect to get 15,000 miles or 24,000 kilometers out of that before I fall out of spec? Maybe, maybe not. But if I make just a 1 shim size change here, which is 5/1000ths, then where is this? I would go to a 0.285. So you see I've gone 290 to 285. So that's a 5/1000ths change. That would result then in my gap being 2.7, which is even more squarely in the middle. So I think this is a good change to make. Subsequently, this guy is right in the middle of perfect. I'm going to leave that one alone. And this one, I could leave that, but if we did change that from a 290 to a 285, we would end up at 2.8, which again is nicely in there, but a little bit wider gap, so I probably won't need to adjust this valve for a long time, or this shim, excuse me. These are the kinds of changes I would make. So that's it. That's one example of working through one particular motorcycle, but the process and the logic applies to any motorcycle with a shim type adjustment setup. If you have a rocker, then that's a different deal because you've got adjustment screws to change that gap. Hey, if you guys like what I'm doing, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like to become an urban monk. Thanks for watching.